Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anupama, Professor at Department of Economics, Punjabi University, Patiala. I am going to talk about the module Urbanization, Unemployment and Poverty from Population, Urbanization and Poverty. So students, we are going to discuss about the interrelationship among urbanization, unemployment and poverty. We will also try to explore if there is any relationship between education, unemployment and urbanization. Employment is the first step out of poverty and an important stride towards greater social integration. It is the key to creating wealth and the primary instrument for its equitable distribution. An achievement, underachievement or non-achievement of employment impacts directly and positively on the degree and depths of urban poverty. Unprecedented urbanization rates in most developing countries are changing the face of poverty. Increasingly, poverty is manifesting itself in cities. Millions of job seekers, men and women, are resorting to the urban informal economy or remain unemployed. In both the situations, they remain poor, whether they are unemployed or employed in an informal job, where the payments are low and the jobs are without any social security. Therefore, if urban areas are eulogized for being a hub of new economic opportunities, they are also the places of scarcities in view of rapid migration from rural areas to urban ones. As the demand for labor in urban areas is less than the labor supply, job creation is always a daunting challenge for the urban areas. Hence, this module aims to throw light on the relationship between poverty and unemployment, the relationship between urban poverty and unemployment, unemployment rates in different countries, urbanization, education and unemployment, the relationship between urbanization and poverty, the poverty rates in rural and urban areas of different countries, and urbanization, poverty and unemployment. The world today is more urban than rural, as more than 50% of population is living in urban areas and rest of the population is speedily moving towards the urban areas. Same is the case with poor population. Population in general and poor population in particular is being urbanized, adding more popularity to the term urbanization of poverty. It seems now that the problems of unemployment and poverty are more of the urban problems, as both of these problems are weakening in rural areas and aggravating in the urban areas. Actually, the poor in rural areas have a choice and optimism that by moving to urban areas they would be better off, but the urban poor have no such choice. They can move from city to city or go back to rural areas and be worse off. The movement of rural poor to urban areas without getting an opportunity to be better off further adds to poverty numbers in the urban areas. Thus, we can find the rising waves of unemployment and poverty along with increasing trends of urbanization. According to ILO, at the beginning of the decade, 1/3 of world's urban population, approximately 400 million people, were living in poverty, with lack of productive employment as one of the most direct causes. The ILO estimates that there will be 1.2 billion new entrants to the world labor market by the year 2025. Most of the new jobs will have to be created in cities, but the inadequacy of jobs would also remain a major issue. Let us discuss about poverty and unemployment. The unemployment in the urban areas results in poverty. Actually, the poor migrants often lack the necessary resources for their survival in the urban setup. They lack human capital, financial, physical, as well as social capital. Inadequacies of these resources raise their vulnerability to all shocks of economic restructuring in the urban areas, leading to increase in unemployment and poverty among these sections of urban populations. Unemployment and poverty thus mutually reinforce each other in a number of ways. This interconnection can be observed from Figure 1. The figure clearly shows that the sense of insecurity and disempowerment, which is a reflection of poverty, has caused and in turn determined by several mutually dependent factors. A poor person with fewer resources also has limited access to the job market. In absence of an employment, a person also has limited access to credit, which not only impedes his or her way to start a new business or avail a livelihood option, but also deprives him or her of a decent living in shape of access to decent housing, education, health, sanitary conditions, and other basic amenities of life. This further impairs his or her ability to get a job in the competitive urban market. Thus, unemployment and poverty have a close nexus. Urbanization and unemployment. During the recent trends of rapid urbanization, job creation has been anemic in many countries, too slow to fully reabsorb the mass of unemployed and underemployed, or particularly in some emerging market economies, to keep pace with labor force growth and the pressures of rural-urban migration. This has led to rise in unemployment rates across the economies. Recent financial crisis has also added to the woes of unemployed people, especially in the urban areas who were largely employed in non-agriculture sector, and the X fell upon them when the world economy shrank in the post-crisis period. In this perspective, first we have a look at the overall unemployment rates and then try to relate the unemployment rates with rates of urbanization in different economies. Figure 2 show the change in overall unemployment rates after the crisis, that is in 2007, in different economies. The figure shows that in the post-crisis period, the unemployment rates in most of the economies have increased. The only exceptions are India, Germany, Brazil, and Indonesia. The largest increase in unemployment rate can be observed in case of Spain, followed by Italy, United States of America, and United Kingdom. Even more worryingly, long-term unemployment, which is defined as an unemployment spell of 12 months or more, has risen sharply in several countries. Among these countries for which data are available, the incidence of long-term unemployment increased most sharply in Spain and the United States, where the share of long-term unemployed tripled to reach an historical high in early 2011, before easing slightly. In previous recessions, the rise in long-term unemployment was in many advanced countries the main channel through which what was originally a cyclical increase in unemployment turned into persistently high unemployment rates. In addition to lowering the the potential output growth via the resulting loss of human capital, there are also substantial social costs related to long-term unemployment as it is associated with a heightened risk of poverty. However, from the relationship of urbanization with unemployment rates, very interesting fact comes to the fore. More urbanized areas have lower rates of long-term unemployment but higher overall unemployment rates. This shows that people in urban areas are mainly employed in casual jobs, or even if they are not employed in regular jobs, they somehow manage to find temporary jobs. Thus, though they remain unemployed for major period of the year, but they do not remain unemployed for more than a year to include them in long-term unemployed labor force. Since cities are home to a number of informal activities, therefore, long-term unemployment falls in more urbanized economies, even though the overall rates of unemployment are higher in more urbanized regions. These facts can be observed from Figure 4, which shows the correlation of urbanization with overall unemployment rates among males and females. These can be observed from Figure 4a and 4b, and the long-term unemployment from Figure 4c. We can easily see a positive association of overall unemployment rates among males as well as females with urbanization rates, and a negative association of long-term unemployment with the urbanization rates. Another important aspect of unemployment in urban areas is to look at the unemployment rates among the youth and across population groups with different levels of education. Ideally, we assume that the tendency of migration among the youth and more educated is higher as compared to the older population and less educated ones. Besides, this is a generally accepted view that more educated are able to avail more employment opportunities than the less educated ones. But ironically, since the job markets in urban areas is dominated by the informal sector, even in the non-farm activities, we find that higher rates of urbanization in different countries have led to higher rates of unemployment among young males, but a lower one in case of young females. As females readily agree to work in insecure, flexible, and part-time jobs, their unemployment rates are lower than that of the males who seek regular full-time jobs. The Figure 6 puts forth the fact that as the rate of urbanization increases, the unemployment rates among the persons with primary education falls, and that of with secondary and higher education increases. This again depicts the structure of the urban job market. The jobs for the professionals are lesser in supply as compared to their demand, while the persons with lower education status fit in themselves whichever type of job is offered to them. Under normal circumstances, the unemployment rate has an inverted U-type relationship with education, which means that the unemployment rates increase with education status up to secondary level of education and then fall thereafter for every increment in years of formal schooling. Thus, unemployment is generally lower in case of persons with primary and higher education as compared to those with secondary level of education. But we are interested to know how urbanization is going to affect these general trends. Therefore, adding the dimension of urbanization to the trends in unemployment rates among persons with different level of education in Figure 3, we can see that as the economies move from less than 50% of urbanization rates to around 75% of urbanization, the unemployment rates for the persons with primary and tertiary education fall, while that with secondary education increases. The curves for unemployment rates for different level of education testify the usual inverted U relationship of education with unemployment rates, as we can see that the curve for secondary level of education is positioned at the top place, followed by primary education and then tertiary education. Thus, unemployment rates are ideally lowest for the persons with higher level of education. But the things change their course as the economies enter a rate of urbanization higher than 75%. At this level of urbanization, the unemployment rate among persons with primary level of education falls. That of the secondary education increases slightly or remain almost stable, but for persons with tertiary education, it increases sharply. At higher rates of urbanization, the unemployment rate for persons with tertiary level of education is found to be even higher than those with primary level of education. This shows that for highly urbanized societies, the unemployment rates are also higher for the persons with secondary and tertiary level of education as compared to the less educated persons. Urbanization and poverty. There is a seemingly widely held perception that poverty is urbanizing rapidly in the developing world. Indeed, some observers believe that poverty is now mainly an urban problem. The unwelcome corollary of the shift in the distribution of world's population towards urban areas is that poverty is increasingly located in cities and towns. With urbanization concentrated in the global south, urban poverty is rapidly growing and in some countries becoming more significant than rural poverty. Though income is always considered the main tool to measure poverty among the urban households, but recently the emphasis is also laid upon other non-income indicators such as living conditions, access to health, education, etc. There are evidences that income poverty is compounded by the problems associated with often awful living conditions. Nearly 900 million people are estimated to live in slums, a steadily growing number despite the fact that since 2000, over 200 million people are also estimated to have moved out of slum conditions. Accommodation, even in inadequate and overcrowded housing, takes up a disproportionate part of poor's income. Many low-income settlements are in peripheral areas of cities, where it may be easier or more affordable to gain access to land, but where there are often limited employment opportunities and health and education services, especially if settlements are illegal. This results in long travel times and high transport costs to reach workplaces, schools, and clinics. Urban residents also have limited opportunities to grow their own food, and while dependence on purchases makes them more vulnerable to abrupt price increases, the poor typically pay more for their food, as the lack of storage facilities means that they cannot buy in bulk, and the poorest groups often have to rely on credit from local shopkeepers. The recent studies on the urbanization of poverty have tried to test three widely heard claims. Firstly, the incidence of absolute poverty tends to be lower in urban areas. Secondly, the urban share of the poor is rising over time. And thirdly, the poor are urbanizing faster than the population as a whole. These questions were first of all undertaken by Revlin and Chen and Sangrola in 2007. They created a data set covering 92% of population in the developing world. After taking a due care of differences in cost of living in rural as well as the urban areas, they fixed the urban poverty line at about 30% higher than the rural line. Even allowing for the higher cost of living facing the poor in urban areas, the dollar a day rural poverty rate of 30% in 2002 is more than twice the urban rate. Similarly, while 70% of the rural population lives below $2 a day, less than half that share does in urban areas. About 3/4 of the developing world's poor still live in rural areas, but poverty is becoming more urban over time. The share of the poor living below dollar a day poverty line in urban areas rose from 19% to 25% over 1993 to 2002, while the urban share of population as a whole rose from 38% to 42% during the same time period. Thus, the poor are urbanizing faster than the population as a whole, reflecting a lower than average pace of urban poverty reduction. Over 93 to 2002, while 50 million people were added to the count of dollar a day poor in urban areas, the aggregate count of the poor fell by about 100 million, thanks to a decline of 150 million in the rural poor. Across countries and over time, as the urban share of the total population rises, the overall, that is urban plus rural, poverty rates tends to fall. Indeed, this new evidence suggests that urbanization has generally done more to reduce rural poverty than urban poverty. New urban problems are emerging in poor and rapidly urbanizing countries. But the experience of countries over time are generally consistent with the view that the rising share of population living in urban areas plays a positive role in overall poverty reduction. From the latest data provided by World Development Indicators 2013, though we are not able to find the share of urban areas in total number of poor, but we can easily see the poverty rates in urban as well as rural areas in different countries of the world. The figure 8 shows that in all of the developing countries for which the data has been displayed, here the urban poverty rates are lower than the rural poverty rates. However, figure 9 shows the poverty reduction rates in selected developing economies. It has been observed that between 2005 to 2012, in most of the developing countries for which the comparable data is available, the rate of poverty reduction is lower in urban areas than in rural areas. Thus, the fall in number of poor is lower in urban areas than rural ones, which explains the reason of increasing share of urban areas in poor population of any country. Urbanization, poverty, and unemployment. Finally, for looking at the interrelations among urbanization, unemployment rate, and poverty, here we can look at the data from South Asian economies, which have been ranked in ascending order of the rate of urbanization. We can see that the rate of urbanization in this region for the selected economies is less than 40%. The figure puts forth an interesting fact that for initial phases of urbanization, that is close to 15%, the unemployment rates fall for both the males and females. But for the phase of urbanization between 15 to 25%, the unemployment rate increases, and interestingly, the poverty rates increase for both of these phases of urbanization. It is only after the countries enter an urbanization rate of greater than 25% that poverty rates fall. However, for higher rate of urbanization, the poverty rates become stable, but the unemployment rates have increased both for males and females. It is generally viewed that for developing economies, the urbanization rates experienced by the developed economies so far are practically unmanageable and adds more to the negative externalities than the positive ones. Therefore, merely increasing the urbanization rates on the footprints of the developed economies may be quite premature and prove to be detrimental for the welfare of the masses. Unmanageable urbanization in developing economies may lead to greater poverty rates. We can understand this fact from figure 11. The figure shows that after initial increase in poverty rates with increase in urbanization, it begins to fall after the countries have reached the urbanization rate of around 29%. Up to urbanization rates of around 65%, the poverty rates have shown the declining tendencies. This is perhaps the phase when urbanization of population is reducing the rural poverty rates, and as a result, overall poverty rates decline. But when population gets urbanized beyond this point, the prevalence of poverty in urban areas leads to increase in overall poverty rates. The experience of developing countries in different parts of the world suggests that the urbanization rates beyond 70% are unmanageable for the developing economies until they are not able to generate sufficient resources for providing basic amenities and infrastructural facilities for growing urban population. So students, let us summarize what we have learned from this module. We have observed that urbanization, poverty, and unemployment have a very close relationship with each other. Even though the urban areas are known as the areas of more and better economic opportunities, yet urbanization may not always be associated with better outcomes. It may be associated with increase in informal employment and increase in unemployment rates for those who are not ready to supply their labor to low-paid, insecure and temporary labor market. Therefore, for higher rates of urbanization, we may also find higher rates of unemployment for the persons with higher level of education. In urban areas, not only the good jobs are scarce, but good living conditions are also not adequate in supply, leading to poor living conditions for majority of the urban population. Those who shift to the outer parts of the city, they may be able to get land for housing, but the conditions become miserable as far as the access to employment, health, education, and the basic amenities is concerned. Living in heart of the city is difficult and costly, and living on borders of the city is miserable. Thus, recognizing these links between urbanization, poverty, and unemployment, the governments should focus on 3 priority areas for their high payoff in urban poverty reduction. These can be employment, labor markets, including the safety nets. Secondly, land, housing, and infrastructure, including private financial markets. And thirdly, intergovernmental relations, including municipal finance and capacity building. At the same time, interventions in other areas, including education, health, transport, etc., are also important to reduce poverty in cities in a more effective way. Since we have also found that urbanization beyond certain rate is unmanageable for most of the developing economies, therefore, either the national and local governments should find appropriate ways and means to manage the rapidly increasing urbanization rates, or should follow an urban containment policy so that urban areas do not grow beyond the manageable limits. That's all with today's lecture. I hope you must have enjoyed it. Thank you.